I think we are good to go on the YouTube front. I'm just going to get that loaded up on my phone and then we can start. All right. Alrighty. So we got people tuning in on the YouTube end. Sweet. I'm going to share my screen. All right, we can get started. So, Jared, would you mind taking a little while to introduce yourself? Sweet. Oh, let me make sure I'm such a moron. I'm incredibly moronic. I
Oh,
keep
did
forgetting
you?
to turn the desktop audio on. This is very unprofessional. That was kind of silly. Um, because I was recording, and obviously you don't want to have your music playing in the background. Would you mind? Sorry, would you mind going over that again, real quick? Just
Yeah,
the major points.
yeah. So I'm a professional 3D artist. I am currently working as a freelancer for Graswald, but I spent the last year with Distillery Visual Effects, a company based out of Canada. And there I worked on some AAA productions like Wendell and Wild and HBO's The Last of Us.
Sweet. And these are a couple of the shots you worked on. That's
Yeah.
pretty sweet. You said you've been I've been talking to you for a little while about this, but you did a lot of the vine work and then some of the trees as well, right?
Yeah, so in episode 3, I'd say probably like 85 to 95% of the vine work was done by me. There's only a couple shots where I did not carry the vines through. And
Gotcha.
then most of the trees that are added in post I made as well.
Hmm. So those were I'm not actually really familiar with how the trees are usually done in these things. So they're added in post.
So most of those trees that you see there are real, but if you look at those houses in the background on that shot above that you were just
Yeah,
looking
yeah.
at, uh, the houses in the background all have fake trees kind of in front of them. This shot is mostly just with the vines. I animated wind and stuff on it. Uh, but yeah, like those houses in the background, they're like those trees are fake. And then if you actually go up to the one where he's walking out of the house,
Mm-hmm.
the trees directly in front of the doorway are both fake. I made them in Speedtree.
Wait, which one you're talking about? Those two in the background.
Yeah,
Gotcha. That's pretty cool.
yeah.
Is the fence also CG?
No, the fence is real there, but we do have a CG replacement for it in some shots and for some set extensions.
I figured,
What's
yeah.
actually interesting about this shot, so the background there, like all that foliage on that embankment is like Megascans assets
Mm.
that I scattered in. Well, I actually didn't scatter them, I hand placed them all. But we had a fence there that we had to paint out because in the story, he hadn't built the fence yet around the town. But
Oh,
for
okay.
the set production, they just built the fence when they were building the set, so we had to take out the fence.
That's fun. That
Yeah.
sounds like a lot of fun. Fun in the most sarcastic sense of the word. I do not have the patience to either learn that nor do that. So that's
It
pretty
really
neat.
wasn't too bad. It was just some like mega scans, like bushes and stuff, and then just
I'm mainly talking
I
about
made little
painting on.
groups and then copied, paste, and rotated
Yeah,
until I had a natural looking little yeah.
I'm mainly talking about the fence. I don't like painting stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit more about how you got acquainted with the industry and where you started, because you're somebody who started as a blender artist and then eventually
Mhm.
moved on to more professional projects. So how did that sort of evolution happen, and how long did it take, really?
Yeah, so I was learning Blender. I started in I want to say 2018, I think. And in when was it? 2021 it must have been. I actually got contacted by Graswald. I had been using some of their assets in some of my artwork, and they were a fan of the work that I was doing with their assets. So they asked me if I wanted to, if you actually go to the one with the rock and the slug, that was kind of the
Which one?
like top row, kind of in the middle.
Oh,
So yeah, there.
this one.
So that was actually after I put this out is when they contacted me and asked me if I wanted to do some freelance work for them creating assets. And that's kind of when I got my start. It was right around the start of 2022, I guess, is when I started working for them. And then about a month later, I actually got contacted by Distillery. They found my art station and they liked my work. And they basically asked me if I wanted to interview for the job. And then I did one interview with them, and then they called me up and offered me the job. So yeah,
That's pretty sweet.
yeah, it was
So
pretty cool.
so that happened pretty quickly, I would say, right?
Yeah, it was kind
It's,
of it was kind of funny because it was one of those things where it's like nothing and then suddenly everything all at once, you know?
mm-hmm.
I had done like one freelance project before that, and then within like a month of having my first like freelance gig, I was offered like a full-time studio gig.
For sure. How do they deal with training you to use like 3ds Max and Speedtree and all that stuff? We
So they were pretty cool about it. They ramped me in pretty slowly where they started out by just handing me like shots that were basically already complete, and the only thing I had to do was just run it through like the render pipeline. And so with that I was able to just get kind of get a handle on like the UI and stuff without having any sort of real responsibilities in the shots,
hmm
uh other than just basically rendering it out and making sure everything looked right. And then they kind of slowly over the course of a couple months like added steps to that. Then it was like, okay, now we're going to have you play with some lighting, and now we're going to have you play with some light modeling, and things like that to just like kind of ramp me into that. I also had a bit of free time because they were ramping me in so slowly, where I was able to just like spend some time playing around in 3DS and like learning how to do things on my own.
hmm We got a question in the chat, by the way. Do you have advice for someone who's trying to break in the 3D industry?
So I don't have like a ton of experience in breaking into the industry other than just what happened with me, but the two things that I would say is like number one, like make sure that you're only putting your best work out on your portfolio. If you want to just like share things, like put that on like your Instagram or share it with your friends, however you want. But in terms of like your art station or whatever it is that is like your portfolio, only put like your best works out on it. It's better to have like fewer works that are strong than a lot of works and have them not all be super strong.
hmm
uh, and then the other thing that I hear all the time, which was also true for me, is like once you get good enough, people will come to you. And I think that is a good way of kind of getting your foot in the door. Obviously, if it's not happening, then I would say like take the initiative and like go online looking for jobs and sending in applications. You never know, you know?
Yeah, that's advice I've heard as well. You're gonna
Mhm.
certainly have a better chance of getting in if they've actually wanted you to be there for long enough that they've actually reached out. So
Yeah. Yeah, like, with both Graswald and Distillery, they reached out to me because of the work that I was doing. If you're putting yourself out there and you're doing good work, companies are always on ArtStation looking around at like profiles and portfolios and stuff. And
mhm.
so, I mean, it might be something like you use a smaller company's products like Graswald, or like maybe you use like Scatter5 or just any other random Blender thing, and you're doing a lot of good work with them. They might take notice of that because they're smaller. So, I was always tagging Graswald and everything I made with their artwork, and that's what got their attention.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, certainly trying to build up and make sure you cultivate that sort of those references, right? Like as you mentioned with
Yeah.
Graswell, right? Like you're gonna find more engagement with a smaller company that will
Mhm.
actually know about you because you're doing essentially free promo. And then eventually, if that free promo gets good enough, they might make you
Mhm.
a part of their team, right?
Yeah, exactly. And with the Graswald, like I had a good relationship with them from, I was doing the artwork with them, and then they liked the freelance work I was doing with them. And so when my time ended at a distillery, I just went back to them and they were super happy to have me back. And it's a great thing to have, like connections like that, even with smaller companies. So that way you can just always have people to work with. And, I stayed in touch with them a bit here and there while I was working with a distillery. I actually, with one of the later projects after The Last of Us, I helped usher in some Graswald assets. So things like that help with maintaining like kind of connections around the industry. And yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, man, that's pretty neat. So obviously you specialize a decent bit in landscape design and such. How did you
Mhm.
really get involved in that realm of 3D? Like for instance, it's not particularly intuitive to me. Somebody who didn't really get into that until more recently, how somebody would approach like I don't know, because tools like Speedtree and such are all very
Yeah.
high end and expensive and not very accessible for beginners.
Yeah. So Speedtree, I didn't, I got into first, they had, I want to say they used to have like a free version. Oh, they had a 1 month free trial. And
Mm-hmm.
so I first played around with it with the 1 month free trial, and I just spent like a month playing with it. And then that expired and I didn't touch it again for probably like 6, 8 months until I started working at a distillery. And there I was one of the only people that had any experience with it. So then they just gave it to me over and over again. And I ended up getting really good with it there. But in general, so it kind of started out at the very beginning, like the how I kind of got into 3D in general was I started out with this idea that I was going to make a game in Unreal Engine. And I basically immediately started spending all of my time focusing on like trying to get the graphics as good as possible because I was always, a graphics snob when I was playing games
Mm-hmm.
before that. I was always like, oh, why isn't this game perfectly photoreal? What's wrong with them?
Yeah, and then you
Uh,
go into Unreal Engine and you realize precisely why.
yeah, yeah. So then I spent, like 2 months in Unreal Engine trying to make it as realistic as possible. And I spent basically no time at all on like actual game development. I was just like making little scenes and trying to push the graphics. And then I ended up kind of getting frustrated with that. And so I switched into Blender because at that point I was already kind of like not focused on making a game and more focused on like trying to make cool scenes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think going into like this kind of environment design, especially with like a focus on nature, just was very much like the natural thing for me to go into. I grew up out in the countryside. I spent a large part of my childhood like in the woods climbing trees and, running around.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I've always been drawn to like those kinds of like scenes and those kinds of like, yeah, it's just what I have the most experience with, and it's the things that I just experience in my real world and draw the most inspiration from, because I'm always out in nature looking at like the leaves and the ground and the bark and looking at everything and being like, wow, there's so much detail and complexity here, and I just want to like capture it.
Hmm. For sure, yeah. I remember being like that too. I was more of a space focused child,
Hmm.
as you might expect from all my work. But when I begrudgingly was dragged along to hikes and such with my family, it was certainly I found enjoyment in looking at little clovers and such and seeing how they worked. That was very fun.
Yeah. Yeah, it is kind of funny. I kind of joke that I've become like an accidental amateur botanist, where I'm like accidentally stumbled into becoming like this person who just studies plants and their structures and what's going on with this one. Is this one related to that one? And every time I'm on a hike, I'm just like staring at all the leaves and trying to analyze, like, oh, these leaves grow in a spiral. Those ones, like bifurcate and things
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that.
I mean, it's really interesting how much you can learn just by studying the shapes of something,
Yeah.
right? Like I sometimes joke about the same thing with an astronomer, right? Because I always do a
Mhm.
lot of space stuff. And while I don't have the hubris to call myself as knowledgeable as an astronomer, I mean, I've certainly picked up quite a wealth of knowledge about at least how stuff is supposed to work and supposed to look. That's something
Yeah.
interesting to take away. You'll always find something that makes
Hmm.
something outside of 3D that you'll will improve when you actually look at how the things are made and how it, like, especially if you're working in the more generative side of art, like this stuff is very generative.
Hmm.
Like it's obviously you mixing in images and stuff, but it's mostly procedural.
Actually, most of the stuff you're looking at right now is handmade.
Was
I
it?
made in Blender with some proprietary tools from Graswald.
Gotcha. My
Yeah.
bad. My bad.
Yeah, the only
Still
so in
stand.
this project, the tree and the vines were made in Speedtree and all the other plants were made in Blender.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, let's go back up here then, because I mean this stuff is
Yeah.
best done procedurally.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you're trying to sort of decipher the distributions of certain things, it certainly you learn a ton about how stuff works. It's
Oh
really
yeah, I
interesting.
spent probably like 20 hours on that tree alone. Like I had a ton of references of pine trees up because it's one of those things where you always think that like I grew up out in the Pacific Northwest hiking through pine forests my whole life. I would think I know what a pine tree looks like, and then it's like, okay, now make a pine tree, and you're suddenly like, wait, what do they look like?
Yeah. You flew
Why
high.
isn't this what a pine tree looks like?
I
So I just had
also
like a ton of pictures and references up and spent a ton of time playing around in Speedtree trying to get the shape right.
I also see the mega scans
Yeah, that was
scope.
something I wanted to play with that project is the idea I had for the tree was I wanted to make like as hero of a tree as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And so I used Megascan's trunk and I used some tools in Speedtree to blend the trunk in with I guess the higher part of the trunk.
I
And
want
so
to.
it's like a way of blending photogrammetry into the procedural generation.
How does this workflow compare to the ones that you would use in a more professional production environment? What do you?
So depending on the situation, this is something that you would do. There's a particular shot in Love, Death, and Robots where they're going through like a frozen woods in like the short The Secret War. And I'm almost positive that that's exactly what they did is they used a photo scan base and then made the tree on top of it in SpeedTree.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, when I was making trees for projects in uh, like my studio work, we didn't really focus so much on the exact shape of the trunk like this, but the rest of the workflow was pretty similar.
Mm-hmm.
Because most of the trees that we were doing were either background, like out of focus, or were the tree tops being replaced so to go over CG. So like we're taking out, say, like the top part of a building to replace it with a CG building, but that there's a tree in real life that kind of covers that building in the frame, and now our CG covers that tree, so we need a CG tree to go back over it. And so there's some shots where it's that kind of thing going on, so it's more focused on the shape of like the higher part of the tree and the leaves a lot more than like the trunk, and the base trunk is usually good enough.
Yeah, like you don't see any of that shit in here. I'm not sure how
Yeah, I
much of
think
this is
all of
real.
those trees in the background there are real, but if you go down, do I have it in this? Is there one more lower?
Yep.
Oh, it's not in here. Okay, there was a shot I did where Bill's driving up to the gate in the front of the town. And or actually, so in that shot, if you click on the scrubber and go, yes, pause it there. Like go back a little bit. A little bit more. Like, yeah, pause there. So the house on the right hand side, the tree in front of that is fake.
This
That
one?
I made that in Speedtree, yeah. So what was there was actually like there wasn't anything there, but there was a real life tree where that tree is, but that building wasn't there. And so when we put that building in, now there's a tree that's closer to the camera than the building, but now it's behind the building because we don't have like a mask for a tree that exists in real life that we can layer it over with. And so in a situation like that, we take the tree, the CG tree, put it where the real tree was, and just use that CG tree to overlay the real tree.
That way it fixes some of the blending issues and such.
Yeah.
That's a pretty interesting way to solve it.
Mhm.
And you don't really notice it, right? This is an
Yeah,
example
so
of good CG, right?
one of the things with I think they actually mentioned this in the latest corridor episode, and I remember like really being like, yeah, that's so true, is when you're working with CG and you have a plate that you have to match to, there isn't really a, oh, well, it looks good, I'm just gonna leave it. Like you have to make it match the plate. And in some ways that's a challenge, but in other ways it's actually like really handy because you get to look at like, oh, here's the shadow depth, here's the, you know, saturation level, here's the this and that to like match it very directly. And so with a lot of the buildings in this town, like the second story and above is all blue screen. And so
Gotcha.
we like all of the buildings, like their roofs and the second stories we replaced. And so you have the first floor and you have the siding for it. And so you just match the exact like luminance values and saturation and stuff of the lower half of the floor. And it looks perfect. And you have that perfect reference of this is exactly what I'm trying to match right next to it.
How much, this is more just general pipeline question. How much does the, like, does your guys' jobs, like, distillery isn't a huge studio, but it's also not a tiny one. How much does your guys' jobs, like, blend in together? Like, you mainly worked on vines and trees and such, but how many buildings do you have to model and all that
So
stuff?
they would blend together quite a bit. So the building, I think it's the first video on this, the building where Frank is pushing Bill toward, yeah, that one. Sorry, the second one down one more.
Oh.
So I originally modeled the top half of this building. And so I kind of defined the look of it with like the two windows and then the windows on the side and stuff. But then I moved on to some other trees and the vines and stuff. And then we got some notes that what they wanted changes to the structure of the building. Because originally it was like a flat top, then they changed it to kind of like a regular A-frame kind of roof on it, which you can't really tell in this shot.
There's a little
But
bit.
and there's a lot of other shots in the show where you can see it better. But
Mhm.
so then one of our asset supervisors went back and he made the changes to the model that I had modeled. And so there's a lot of situations like that, or there was a shot with like the gas station that they go to at the beginning of the episode before they make it to the town. The vines on that I didn't do. One of my coworkers, Paul, who's a super talented artist, he did the vines for that. And so I passed him my setup, I showed him my workflow, and then he went from there and made them on his own. So there actually is a lot of crossover in that, where you're picking up, like those leaves on the ground there are all CG that we scattered in, and I picked that setup up from another artist and then modified it for this shot. And yeah, so there's a lot of crossover in general. Yeah.
Gotcha. That's pretty cool.
Mhm.
See, I'm just gonna scroll through these a few more times because I'm kind of interested in trying to pick up all the tiny details. Because these shots are done very well, and
Mhm.
because you can't really, like, you wouldn't be able to tell me like that tree was CG, right?
Yeah.
Or any of these buildings really. I think, I mean, I'm kind of a monkey when it comes to how to actually manage a production, but I think it's certainly, um, I mean, the whole show really, they managed their ambitions very well. It
Mhm.
seemed, so that they didn't get in over their heads and make stuff that doesn't look good.
Yeah, something that I think actually worked out in the favor of the show was originally Craig wanted everything to be a lot more understated. When we started work on it, the amount of like overgrowth and grunge to the buildings was going to be a lot less, and the scope of the project actually crawled quite a bit during production. And typically that's actually kind of a annoying thing or a bad thing that you don't want to happen. But I
Mm-hmm.
think it was a lot better than going the other way, where it's like everything's going to be super crazy and then having to walk it back because you can't execute on it on time or on budget and stuff like that. And whereas I think he started out like a bit too conservative, and then that allowed us to like, oh, now we're just adding a couple more things.
Mm-hmm.
And we started out real like a lot more subtle and so it's really easy to pull off like this part of it, and then we add a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, rather than just jumping in and being like, yeah, and then like we're gonna have like a zombie break out through the top of this church and everything's gonna blow up, and all
Mm-hmm.
this crazy stuff is gonna happen. It's like, oh, we're gonna go a bit more grounded and subtle, and then slowly walk it up until we find like a nice sweet spot.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly allows for more attention to detail because you aren't
Mhm.
focusing on making absurd shots look good.
Yeah.
Because
And I
there are
don't
no
I
absurd
don't know
shots.
how much this contributed to it, but I did get a lot of positive feedback on the vines from both Alex and Craig. And they like seeing the vines and then going, we want more vines, we want more vines on things. So I don't know how much it contributed to the overall like aesthetic of the show, but I do know with like Billstown, like the how well the vines integrated into the look of the town definitely contributed to like the crawl of how overgrown and like desolated the town was in the final sequence when Joel and Ellie are there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty neat.
Mhm.
So, do you want to go into like Blender and do some more technical stuff? Because I'm, I don't really have too many more questions about the more like studio production end of things.
Yeah, is there anything I mean, we can look at like my art station if there's anything that like anybody wants to take a look at, or if there's anything you have some questions on, I'd be happy to go in and talk about it.
Is there anybody in the?
To Beth 606. Um so I started out on a really it was a budget PC I made when I was 16 back in like 2014. I spent like $450 on a computer, and I had a GTX 950 and a fourth gen i5. And I started using Blender in like 2018, 2019. So I had a budget PC that was like 4 or 5 years old when I started. And the like it was limiting in some ways, but the biggest thing was is I just had to be patient, like a render like a fully dense scene for me was a like a 10-hour render. And so when I was working, a lot of things were a lot slower because I could only preview parts of my render at a time. And
Mhm.
then I would have to render my whole project overnight just to get a preview of what my project looked like. And so hardware definitely can be limiting, but you can also make good looking artwork off of pretty limited hardware. Like I've made some things that I'm fairly proud of when I was just like hanging out on my laptop that doesn't have like very solid specs.
I think the same philosophy that you talked about with being conservative at the start and slowly adding in more and more can apply here because I also started on a shitty laptop, right?
Yeah, focus on. So this is a thing. I have a friend who's an artist who's not a 3D artist. But every now and then he'll send me something in 3D and he'll be like, "Oh, it's not like technically as good as you, but like I really liked this or whatever." And it'll be something that has amazing color, amazing composition, like it's overall a really strong image, but it's not very high poly, it's not very polished, and it doesn't have a lot of that like edge to it that like really makes it, like this high quality thing or whatever. But the fundamentals in it are really strong, and that's way more important. I would much rather look at an image that, like the technical side of it in terms of like how photoreal it is and how, like perfectly high poly everything is to where you can't tell that it's CG and stuff like that. I would rather look at an image where that's a lot stronger than, or where the art fundamentals are a lot stronger than where that's stronger. Because if you have a perfectly photorealistic image, but it looks like you just walked out in the woods and took a photo of a random tree, like nobody's gonna care. Like that doesn't, like you didn't do anything. But if you
Actually,
take an image
I know
that's a
quite a few
really
people who would
artistic
care.
painting that's really low res in terms of like the fidelity of like the polygons and like the shaders or whatever, but it's very well orchestrated artistically, everybody would rather look at that image anyways.
I would hesitate to say everybody because I'm the kind of guy that will look at like a completely photorealistic stump and be like, "Fuck yeah."
Well, I mean, there is like technical appreciation, but what I'm meaning like is if I were to just like upload a picture of my cell phone camera, I went out in the woods and I just like took a picture of the woods with my cell phone camera, and then I made that exact image in 3D. That's going to be a lot less strong of a portfolio piece, and that's going to be a lot less strong of a piece in general than
Hmm.
something that is less photorealistic, less like solid on like the technical side in air quotes, but has much stronger art fundamentals, has like an element of story, has strong use of color, has great composition, has good depth.
Hmm. For sure, yeah. Yeah, it is very. I'm kind of more on the technical side. I don't
Mhm.
have a great artistic vision, at least not for like really novel things. I'm pretty good with space stuff. So trying to balance that has always been a struggle.
Yeah.
So I've tried to appeal to the crowd that's more like, oh, dude, that cloud looks like crisp as fuck, right? Focusing on the individual cloud instead of the whole thing.
Yeah.
So I come a bit from the opposite perspective, really trying to appreciate technical stuff.
Mhm. Yeah, there's definitely a place for that too. And I think that when you're limited on the hardware specifically, it's a lot harder to get to the place where you have like this super strong technical, like trying to work with your Jupiter shader or Jupiter, planet system on like, he has a mini Mac M1, he's not going to be able to see Jupiter or work with it. It's going to take him like 30 hours to get like 10 samples to
Mm-hmm.
see the shader. And so that's more what I was referring to is like when you're really stuck on specs, try and focus on making a better image than making a more photoreal image. Like have that be the trade-off of I want
Yeah.
something that's like stronger in an artistic sense than the strongest thing in a like photoreal sense with like 32 layers of debris on the ground for like the nature or whatever.
Hmm. One thing I have noticed though is that I consider it actually a bit of an advantage um, to start out with bad hardware because you learn tricks and stuff that a lot of people that started off on the highest hardware they never get to learn, right?
I
Like
I agree with that. Yeah,
for
I think
instance,
that my
my
constraints at the beginning definitely helped me grow faster as an artist as well.
yeah, like I mean, my memory management skills aren't that great, but I know a lot of people who don't have any, and mine are
Mhm.
like very good compared to theirs. And speaking of memory management and performance management stuff, we've recently gone into a bit of an environment kick on this server.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
not just me, but
Mhm.
like a lot of people have been working on some cool environments and such, and that's been cool to see. But it's like that's what happens when you get somebody that has been limited, or like an entire community that's been limited in some degree, and then you give
Mhm.
them a tool that takes away some of that limitation. In this case, it was letting everybody know about instancing and viewport proxies. That was just like it opened the floodgates.
Yeah.
It's like people on laptops doing
Mhm.
millions of polygon trees scattered over an entire terrain.
Yeah, I'll have to put out a tutorial on it, but I have a pretty good system for using like linking viewport proxies and like render layers to make larger scenes a lot more memory efficient to work with.
Yeah, I haven't explored linking that much. I usually just
Mhm.
append stuff in there because I like to
So
modify materials.
I had never really played with linking until I started working at a distillery, and in Max there's a system called XREF, and it's basically the same thing as linking in Blender. But it just made like these super heavy scenes that we had that would be impossible to work with everything in the scene. It made them super light and quick to load, and so we were able to work really quickly in our working files. And then if we needed to change anything, we would just go into the file that had that asset, and then that system is a lot lighter to work with, and then we can just pop in and change that, pop back over to our main file, like our working file, and yeah.
Cheese asks why your name is Tourette.
Yeah, so it's Carrot, and it's a joke from high school. So I have really bad handwriting. It's actually kind of funny. It's gotten a lot better since high school, but my handwriting used to be absolutely horrendous. And I wrote my name, which is Jared Timme, on like a school form where we were like signing up,
Mm-hmm.
and whoever was reading it read my name as Tarot Time, and so they just wrote my name on the school form Tarot Time, and this is like a somewhat official school form. And so then it kind of just caught on as a nickname in high school. All my friends called me Tarot for like 2 years,
That's
and then
actually
so I just kept it as my nickname whenever I'm online.
that's actually quite hilarious. I have
Yeah,
a similar predicament. I'm right-handed, like strongly so, but I learned to write with my left hand, which is far less dexterous.
interesting.
So my handwriting is like equally bad on both hands,
Mm,
which is funny as fuck.
yeah.
Because I'll tell people like, oh, I'm ambidextrous, and then I'll just write horribly with my left hand, and then write horribly with my right hand.
That's funny.
Um, yeah, that's a little bit off topic, but hey, that's pretty fun. Oh, how's the someone on the chat asked how's the transition between Blender and 3ds Max?
Um, I did find it kind of challenging personally. I think that overall the systems are actually pretty different beyond just like UI changes. I think a lot of the systems and way that you work with things are fairly different, but I think that it was more I'm trying to think of how to describe it. I think it was more also the fact that as I was making the transition, I was making a transition from the workflow that I had taught myself into a studio production pipeline that was also, because Distiller is a very young company, so their pipeline was also under development. So I was learning how to work with a heavily modified version of 3DS where our tools were changing a lot because they were creating new tools for us to use all the time. Uh, and so I think that added to the challenge for me. Whereas I think if I were to just go straight from Blender to 3DS as like a base 3DS or a 3DS that was already fully complete in the pipeline, I might not have had the same level of difficulty. But it didn't take me too horribly long still. It was a little bit slower than I guess I would have necessarily wanted, but I think that it still didn't take me like too crazy long.
Hmm. That's interesting. What sort of things do they change in the Studio 3DS Max? Is it
I
mainly
don't
hotkeys or is it like complete
know. It
tools?
was more just like workflow stuff. Like, oh, we have a new tool for like how we submit our render layers, or like how we work with things. I don't know exactly how much detail I can get into with like specific pipeline tools,
Yeah, I wouldn't
but
ask you for that. I'm just wondering.
yeah, it was more with like general workflow changes rather than like and some level like there were some like custom like UI tools that we had that shifted as well.
Hmm.
Why doesn't my voice fit with me? I don't know. In what way doesn't my voice fit with me? Were you expecting it to be deeper?
I'm waiting in eager anticipation for
Yeah,
this
me too. I want
reply.
to see what Cheese has to say to this.
Now he doesn't know what the fuck to say. You look like Sam kind of voice. What does that mean?
I don't know what that means. Yeah. I look like I would have Sam's voice. Is that what you mean?
What the
Interesting.
fuck?
Well, I've never had any voice other than my own, so I guess I think my voice fits me.
Dude, I've had a couple voices over the years.
Well, I mean, like, obviously my voice has changed over the years, but it's always been my voice.
I mean, fair enough. I had a strong Indian accent phase that I'm really trying not to think about now.
That's funny.
Yeah,
I
I think
actually,
I
I
I
do a
had
little bit
a
of a British inflection sometimes. Like, I'll do upspeak a little bit, and I think that that throws people off.
Did you have a Borat phase?
No, it's more, I just
My high
would
school
watch a
went
lot of random, like, British shows.
went through like a Borat voice phase,
Mm,
which is like 10 years past its time, but somehow it
yeah,
still caught on. It was pretty funny. Good
that
times.
is funny.
Um, Back to topic though.
What are my long-term career goals? That's actually a really good question. I've been giving that a lot of consideration lately. Um, I do think I want to get back into doing studio work and working on more AAA projects. I think that kind of work was really engaging and I had a lot of fun with it. I was also really proud of a lot of the work that I was doing in that area. So I think I do want to get back into that. But something I've discussed with like Sam and some other people as something that I want to do and like maybe would be a thing possible in the future. But I have an idea that I think it would be really cool to do something akin to what Corridor is doing, but more focused on CG environments and using like new tools that are available with like real-time graphics and virtual production, and kind
And
of doing that in a more CG focused area.
and
But
like make
that'd be pretty far out at this point.
and I'm assuming that would include making a caustics video that actually mentions LuxCore.
Yeah, so like the idea is more like doing a channel where the goal is to be making cool shorts and making videos on the process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
Chris, if
think
that was $1 million question, I would be a very happy person. Getting
So
an agent for freelance work. That's not something I have thought about. I don't know. Do people do that? Is that a thing? People get like agents for
I haven't
freelance
heard
work?
of it. Usually
Yeah.
people just reach out to me. I guess if you get big enough and you're trying to manage offers, that's something that would
Mm.
matter. But I mean,
Yeah, I'm not Steve Corman
yeah, I'm
or Paul
only.
Chediosson. That's a really fun last name.
Is that how you pronounce it? I've always just said like Chad Deason,
Yeah, it's French, so it's Chediosson.
Chediason.
Chediosson.
My career aspirations, I want to work in the industry as well.
Mm.
Um, I mentioned briefly some of the stuff going on in the last stream with Cov and Martin. But basically, I'm currently working freelance mainly. I'm managing a few projects right now. I don't like freelance though because I always procrastinate. I need something to keep me accountable. Um,
Yeah, I feel that the last couple months of managing my own time and driving myself to be productive have been a bit. It's been challenging in a way. Like it hasn't been too terrible, but it definitely is a lot different than having a schedule set by somebody else that you have to follow.
uh-huh. I mean, both have their pros and cons, right? But when I'm contracted to do something like maybe like a couple nebula shots, right?
Mhm.
Um, like I start looking up reference pictures and stuff, and then I start going down a rabbit hole of like, oh shit, a planet just appeared on my Google Images. I want to make that now, and it's like a whole spiral.
Yeah.
Inspiration is really hard to manage. Um,
Yeah, I struggle with that too. I was actually telling you the I was telling you the other day that a thing for me is almost all of my projects are a week or less because that's about how much attention span I have for a single project before my mind has moved on to another thing that I want to create. And once my mind has really like taken inspiration in another thing, it's really hard for me to like buckle down and focus on the thing that I was working on. And so I'm aware of that timeline and I kind of structure my projects in a way that is I'm going to finish this project in this number of days basically. And so I would be able to maybe make like better things if I spent, 2 months on it. But at this point it's like I'm going to spend a week on something and then there's a new thing that I came across, like a new composition, new image, new subject or something that has totally captured my imagination and now I have to like make something off of that.
oh yeah, yeah. It's for those of you that are interested. I think this is a worthwhile topic. If you want to raise your artistic skill, usually projects don't get quicker with time. They get slower. Um, Obviously that's not always the case, but if you're learning new stuff each time you do a project, like it's gonna eventually take longer to get better results. It's just a fact of the matter. So if you try to break it up um like just building the steps, like for instance, if I'm making a landscape and I want to do it from scratch, I'd start with making a tree and then making other trees, and I like put them into like an ecosystem, right? And then I make the mountain. And then each of those are separate sub projects that contribute to the final thing. So that's a good way to break up your time. Um Usually
Answering Jeff's question real fast about our interaction with the TD devs. So Distillery is actually a really small studio still. They're only about 60 people, which in terms of like a VFX house is a pretty small boutique studio. And so we didn't necessarily have a ton of interaction in terms of like direct influence over their work. It's more if we encounter any issues with like technical bugs with the like production workflow or any sort of TD tools that they've created, then we'll flag it with them and reach out to them. And usually, because it's such a small team, within like 20-30 minutes we're on a call with them, figuring it out. uh but it's a pretty small studio, so we all knew each other. It was a pretty tight knit culture, so everybody could just kind of reach out to everybody. There were people that weren't particularly in my department that I would just converse with and talk to a lot, and we didn't necessarily do a lot of direct work with each other. But yeah.
That's pretty interesting.
Mhm. Yeah, it's kind of nice. I don't know how it would be at like a massive studio like ILM or Weta, but I imagine it would be a lot more segmented, and you would probably don't even really know the PD guys if you're a generalist, and you maybe know the compositors if you're, working in 3D.
Yeah, I see. I was talking about something. Oh yeah, breaking up projects. I think I'm
Oh
gonna
yeah,
continue my thought there.
yeah.
So, for
Sorry.
instance, when I was doing my hard surface stuff, I still am, but I'm kind of taking a break from that. And you do need to take a break from stuff, by the way. Nobody can tell you that you don't need to take breaks from stuff because it will wear you out. So when I'm doing that, and I don't think of it as a singular ship that needs to be modeled, I think of it as individual greebles usually. And if I don't want to work on any general ship structure stuff, I need to work on like maybe a pipe greeble that's gonna go somewhere. It's like that's a pretty satisfying thing to do because you get a completed project by the end of it, right? And that's pretty
Yeah.
fun. So like sort of building up your tools is just as fun as making a final
Mhm.
piece. Like for
Yeah.
instance, if I'm still sharing my screen, I'm working on some environment stuff. So I've been making this scattering system, this ecosystem, and I've been using Speedtree to model the trees. And I've been combining them with geonodes and Blender. Just scatter them. And this is a pretty quick process. Well, at least the individual components are pretty quick. A lot quicker than making a fully realized landscape for sure. But it's an incredibly satisfying result because, oh, I can literally like drag and drop this node group into a new project and then just mess around with it. And that makes my life so much easier. And just knowing that, it's such a satisfying feeling.
Mhm.
But yeah.
Yeah,
What
you said something at the beginning that reminded me. So I think probably the single best piece of advice that I've gotten like my entire 3D career was to not fight burnout. So like if you're feeling starting to feel burnt out and you don't want to create anything, you're not feeling inspired, then just don't. Like just take a break, don't make anything until you're feeling inspired again. Because when you're really fighting burnout and like forcing yourself to do something is when you actually kill your drive to do it.
mm,
Like creativity isn't something that can really be forced in that way, where if you're having creative block, if you're having some level of burnout and you're forcing it, you're not going to be making good stuff anyways. You're going to look back on that stuff and not really be very happy with it
yeah.
because you weren't feeling the drive to do it anyways. And I think that that's why I've been able to stick with this thing longer than like a lot of other things that I've tested out or played with in my life, is because I didn't fight it whenever I didn't feel like doing it. And so I've taken, there's been times where I've done like no art for like 2 months or so. I've just nothing to put out. I didn't make anything. I was just doing other things in life. But I've always come back to it because I have like this creative drive overall. And so if I'm burnt out on creating, it just needs to recharge. Like it's going to come back.
Yeah, yeah. One thing that I've found is sometimes you don't just, especially when you're trying to commercialize your success and such, you don't always have the luxury of being able to just like shelve your art for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
And that's certainly one of the biggest downsides of being in a time sensitive like heavy production environment
Mm-hmm.
because I mean you're gonna run into
So with my
situations like that.
experience with that, like working at a studio and stuff, is when that's happening, you tend to lean more on the creative energy of the people around you and the rest of the team. That's when, yes, you are creating still, but instead of it being like this thing that you're really pushing yourself and like the creativity and drive to like create from within, it's more you're executing on somebody else's vision. And so for me personally, at least, that didn't feel the same. Like working on The Last of Us, I would kind of go back and forth between like there were some times where it's like the work wasn't necessarily like the most inspiring thing or like my inspiration with it burnt out rather. And in those times it was more like, okay, well, we have like a defined look, we have a defined goal, we have, like these things. And so I can just, be a button clicker for a couple weeks. And then I would, being like a massive fan of The Last of Us, like the inspiration would come back and then I'd be like, oh, I'm gonna do all of this stuff. I'm gonna, like there was actually some vines on some things that I didn't need to make that I made because I was like, oh, it'd be so cool. Like this shot, if we had vines here, that would look great. So I like went out of my way and put vines on that. And and then there were other times where it was just, yeah, okay, I'm gonna just turn out some stuff with our setup and push things through our you know, push things through our pipeline rather than like have that real. And during those times, it's like, okay, well, if it's not, my best work, I'm going to get notes on like, hey, put more effort in this area. And then I'll go back and like, focus on those details because there's kind of like it's not just accountability, but like there's feedback telling you what to do. So if you're going to be, just a button clicker for a week, you can still do that.
That's I've been chuckling to myself for like this past minute because the thought of you as like some sort of mystical vine leprechaun is just the funniest thing I've thought of today. Give it to Jared, he'll make you vines.
Oh man, it was a love-hate relationship. Like you know, I like working with plants. Growing vines on things was a lot of fun, and there were some things like I said where I was like, oh, it'd be so cool if there's vines on this. So I went out and did it on my own. But then there was some things like that. I mean, the thumbnail for The Last of Us project there with like that shot, I think I had like 143. That was like version 143 that went out or something like that. I made like 45 different versions of the vines for it. And every time I got notes on that shot, I was just like, "Ah, again."
Yeah.
It was that shot took me longer than any other shot on the show just because like again like the crawl and stuff and then we added wind to it because there's wind in the background and there's just so many different elements that slowly creeped in and then they kept wanting changes to like the look of the vines on it and stuff but yeah it was that one. It's actually one of the shots I'm most proud of, so I'm not like you know upset that that's the way it went. It's more like I was just like, oh man, version
Yeah.
142, here we go. Hopefully this is the last one. Oh, I got notes. Better come back to change my vines again. But
Yeah. Yeah. Personally, for me, trying to do this sort of thing, like if I'm doing a personal project that I really want to get completed, but I just don't have the energy to work in it. Sometimes I just go to ArtStation. Let's say I'm doing my hard surface stuff. Like, I mean, there's enough just random hard surface stuff in here. Also, porn. Half of ArtStation.
I
ArtStation is
think
one.
we were joking about that. We're like, ArtStation has like two moods where it's like the most incredible art that you've ever seen, and then it's like anime girl boob study, and you're like, oh man, why is this here? Like, I'm not here for this.
It's got like a higher concentration of pornographic content than like probably Reddit. Like, it's actually crazy.
Yeah.
Um, look, I mean, what the fuck?
That is a big thing. Your main point here. That is actually a big point for me too. Is whenever I'm feeling low on inspiration, I just scroll through ArtStation, and usually there's an idea or a concept that gets me excited about something after a little while.
Yeah, like for instance, I just typed in hard surface, right? And if I'm trying to motivate myself for hard surface stuff, I can certainly find something. Especially, I
One of the
think it
cool
was like,
things about like doing environment work is I feel like you're able to pull inspiration from a lot more places. So a lot of my favorite artists that I follow do like concept art and are mainly like 2D or do like a 3D base and paint over in uh
oh yeah,
2D. Because it's more about like the story, the composition, like the conceptual elements that inspire me rather than like wow, look at how well they made this rock or
hmm,
that tree or something. It's like, wow, this is such a great scene. I want to try and make something that inspires me in this way.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I've played around with AI image generators a little bit. I haven't touched it in probably like, I don't know, 6 months or so. Whenever the buzz around Midjourney first cropped up, I played with it a bit, and then after a couple months, I kind of put it down. I do think it's like a decent tool for creating like references or getting inspiration. I don't really have anything against it for the use of that kind of thing either. I think it's because like the ethical concerns with it are more about like commercializing the product that you get out of it. If you're getting something and you're using that as inspiration to create your own thing, I think that's not really any different than looking at other artists' art to get inspired. Uh, Personally, so I've played around with it a bit. I found myself coming back to real artists though. Like I thought it was a cool tool. I think that it does have some room in that space, and if it works for you, then like awesome. I'm not gonna knock that. But for me, I think there's like a certain human element that's missing from it that isn't necessarily something that I was like really consciously feeling. I just over time was like not using it as much because I was more into human artists that I followed.
It feels like a refraction of human art. Is my best way of
Mhm.
describing it. I'm not sure if if you guys are getting the same imagery from that
Yeah.
description as I am, but like that's sort of what it feels like. Like it, you get the lighting and the shapes in some places, but it's not
I
the
also feel
same. It
like
doesn't have the
like
cohesion.
everything it puts out is like, hey, you really like orange teal, right?
Hmm. And I saw quite a few threads about it's not just a weighted average. It's not just a weighted average. It's not
Yeah.
just a weighted average. It's like technically speaking, I mean, depending on which perspective. Like I'm not an AI.
Mhm.
I'm not very well acquainted with it, but it's like it's a sort of thing like all of it. It's always in a similar art style, so it's hard to make the argument that it I don't know.
Yeah.
It's not like some amalgamation of its parts.
And it's also like if I'm gonna go in and be like, oh, this thing, but like, I want a scene that's made by Stephen Corman, or I want a piece that's made by like Florent Lebrun. It's like, why am I not just going to Stephen Corman or Florent Lebrun or Lebrun and looking at their art? Like if I'm putting in an artist to get inspiration, then it's like, why am I not just looking at the artist to get inspiration?
Yeah,
Do I
yeah,
really need to like change like Stephen Corman into making like medieval art or like Florent Lebrun into making like sci-fi in order to like why don't I just find an artist that does it, it's like yes, a lot of these artists do have like kind of their own style or whatever, but it's like if I want a concept artist doing space stuff, like there's a lot of easy to find human artists that do that.
hmm,
I don't need to take an existing artist and just shift their style into that.
yeah. I've noticed personally, like I moderate the Melody Sheep Discord, and they have a rather active Mid Journey community because I mean it's a fun little thing to do.
Yeah.
I haven't caught it a whole lot, but it's like I think once or twice somebody was like trying to make black holes and like make a black hole in the style of Sam Krug, and I was like, what?
I wonder what I kind of thought that I never really did end up playing with it, but I kind of wanted to put in like a descriptor of like one of my art pieces, like macro image of mushrooms by Jared Timme, and see if it like just spits out one of my pictures.
Yeah. Oh, it's not gonna do that. It just
Well, I know it's not going to like directly, but you know what I mean. Where it's
I
like I,
know.
I want to see like does it actually have me in their database as a reference? Like it probably does to some degree because they just scraped all of ArtStation. But
Yeah, I checked one of the what was it? It was like haveibeentrained.com or something that scrubbed through the
Mm,
databases, and I did find like one or two of my pieces on there. I'm pretty sure. It's been a while. I don't actually
yeah,
remember all the details, but one or two isn't really enough to make a
yeah,
accurate profile. You'll find a lot more from
for
some
sure.
other people.
I remember when NFTs were first blowing up, I actually had some of my artwork stolen and put on
Really,
which one was it? I don't think it was OpenSea. It might have been OpenSea. It was put on something.
yeah.
And because it a bunch of people who had been featured on Blender artists had their artwork taken from there and
Mm.
were minted into NFTs.
I stayed so distant that I don't think that happened with me. But if it did, I
I
wouldn't know.
I only found out about it because Blender artists contacted me and said, "Hey,
Oh, did they?
we had a bunch of people get their art ripped, and you're one of them, or and you might be one of them. Here's how to check." And they provided me a link, and so I just went through, and I had like one or two pieces up there.
Gotcha. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's pretty annoying. I remember
I
at
would have
least,
never found out otherwise, but
yeah, yeah. I don't think that happened with me. I was featured like once or twice on there too, but I think that was a little bit before the NFTs really became a thing.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, back to AI art though. There are certainly uses for it that I can appreciate. I think it was Max Hay who did the video about integrating it into 3D with Blender. I was like, that's a pretty sweet idea.
or like corridors, like anime
Yeah, that was pretty
thing they
cool as
did.
well.
That was really cool too.
That
That had
was
like a ton of work on top of it too. That really,
that was like that was just a style change though, more or less. You know
more or
what I
less
mean?
that like they did use it for certain elements and stuff too. But yeah, it was just kind of style transferring their short into an anime.
Yeah. I mean, that was certainly interesting, but I mean, well, I don't know if there's really a button scenario. It was really cool what they did. But
Mhm.
obviously it still has a ways to go before it looks like a real anime because it's like pretty
Yeah.
flickery and such. It
Yeah,
looks
I
like
think if they had like actual 2D artists that could go in and clean it up better. Uh yeah.
yeah, and there's certainly a way out there to algorithmically make sure that that doesn't happen. We just have yet to find it.
Yeah.
That's pretty. I mean, it's really interesting to see the different ways that people are taking it. I don't think the trying to create art in the style of other people that feels way too deep fakey for me.
Yeah.
Like that just feels uncomfortable. I don't really support it. It's like, I mean, why would I? That seems very weird to be trying to copy someone else's style, like one for one, and not even like it's kind of excusable when you're like pushing the sliders around in Blender, but like when you're just inputting a prompt, it feels very weird.
Yeah,
Uh,
there's a huge difference between like going through the steps to recreate somebody else's piece of art as a way of studying techniques they might have used for your benefit in the future and clicking a button because you want the end result. Because it's like if I'm gonna go copy a artist I like and try and recreate one of their pieces, I'm not doing it because I want to have made their piece. It's I'm doing it because I want to learn how to make things as well as they did, and I want to end up being able to create things as well as they did on my own rather than uh just get their end result image.
on that topic, here's one of my main inspirations for my black hole, right? This
Mhm.
is me trying to do my own system in Blender for this is vastly different than me just plugging it into an AI generator
Yeah, exactly.
because I learned so much more through that. By the way, check this guy out. It's pretty nutty.
Mhm.
One of my favorite Blender artists.
Yeah, I'll have to check them out.
Um, yeah. Um, I'm getting pretty tired, so I think I'm gonna wrap this up pretty soon. Does anybody have any final questions? I'm gonna take that as a no. Um,
Oh, uh, Fef is typing.
all right. While he's typing, Jared, do you have any closing statements?
Uh, I guess just like thanks for having me on. This was fun. We'll have to talk more in like the podcast thing we were talking about setting up or
Yeah. By
with
the way, for
Cov and Martin.
those who are seeing this, this isn't probably going to be viewed by a ton of people, but still, those who made it. Me, Jared, Cov, and Martin are currently planning some fun stuff. Um, a little bit less in podcast form. I mean, we'll still do that,
Or
just sort of
yeah.
group talks. But we were thinking more of like Blender and well, just 3D challenges. Um, like for instance, working off of prompts and doing that live. I think that might be a really fun way to do some stuff. Keep your eyes up for that. It'll be pretty fun.
I guess one last thing for me is I mean, I'm always open to talking to people, so if you guys ever have any questions or want to reach out to me, feel free to do so.
Yeah,
Uh,
YouTube peeps. Jared's an admin on my Discord server. He's been around there basically since day one, more or less. So
You can also find me on Instagram at Jared Timme, if you want to message me on there or
yeah, I left
yeah.
some of your links in the description. I'll put your Insta there as well. Now that
Cool.
I think about it. So yeah, um, yeah, I'm going to cut the stream.
All right. Bye guys.